and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Rodrigo Duterte, the former president of the Philippines, has been arrested and is now in the custody of the International Criminal Court at The Hague. The ICC's Office of the Prosecutor says there is reasonable grounds to believe that Duterte bears criminal responsibility for crimes against humanity linked to his deadly war on drugs. Now, what does Duterte's arrest mean for the Philippines, for Southeast Asia, and for global accountability? Well, joining us now to explore these questions, I have Dr Khoo Ying Hooi, who is Associate Professor in the Department of International and Strategic Studies at Universiti Malaya. Dr Khoo Ying Hooi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for being here.
Hi. Rodrigo Duterte's arrest, it's unprecedented, not just for the Philippines, but also for Southeast Asia. It's the first time we have a former Asian leader being detained by the ICC on charges of crimes against humanity. Can I ask you, Ying Hooi, what this moment represents, what you think this moment represents, both in terms of justice and also in terms of political accountability?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Melisa. So I think we have been learning about the case of Rodrigo Duterte for a long time. And while the human rights groups have been pushing for to put him in the justice for years, what happened recently in the ICC certainly is a very historical moment in the times of where we see there's so many global human rights crises, and also we see that there's this very little hope to end the impunity. And more so when we look at the Southeast Asia region, it is in fact not only Duterte's, but also we have the indictment of the General Min from the Myanmar junta as well. But very often, I think within the region itself, we always the human rights groups always pushing for that, but the human rights groups also at the same time always thinking that, is this going to happen? And I think Duterte's bringing to the ICC certainly not only historicals in the Philippines politics, although, of course, if you open up to the Philippines politics, there's many layers of how these things can happen so swiftly. But despite of all these, the skepticisms of how the ICC can work, I think certainly for the regions whereby we see so many democratic backslidings and authoritarianisms that are basically dominating the region, this is certainly the moment that I feel we all should continue such a discussions about the impunity in the Southeast Asia.
Can I ask you about comments? So Duterte's supporters, they've been arguing that his arrest is an attack on Philippine sovereignty, that this is in fact foreign interference. And I'm sure you've heard that narrative before. How do you see this tension playing out in Duterte's case? I mean, do you think his arrest will challenge or will reinforce the way we here in Southeast Asia think about sovereignty in the region?
Well, it's very common to use the argument of state sovereignties when it comes to human rights discourse. It is a very common theme that we always have to face. But I think what's more important is that, yes, there is a one side of the narratives coming from the pro-Duterte supporters that arguing that he has not been even been trial in the Philippines court, and why the Philippines government actually agree to this. But I think what opens up to this is that we have heard the press statements, the press conference come from the current president, Marcos Jr., that he said that he argued that this is in compliance with the Interpol's request. So I think, of course, legally, this can be discussed and debated for a long time, but I believe this certainly has a political dimension within it.
Okay, and what about the implications for Southeast Asia, for the region? You talked about ending the culture of impunity amongst Southeast Asia leadership. When we think about maybe this setting a precedent for holding leaders accountable, do you think it might change the way ASEAN will respond to human rights violations in their member countries?
I think what happens in the Southeast Asia or within the ASEAN itself is the structural impunity that we have been witnessing for decades. And what happens with the Myanmar, in the Rohingya and so forth. But I think what is really important is that while I do not certainly see that the ASEAN leader will actually change drastically because of the ICC's case on Duterte. But I think this is a good opportunity to continue to discuss about the possibilities of bringing the human rights violators and the perpetrators into justice. And sometimes, while it cannot happen within the national boundaries, but the international mechanisms or regional mechanisms can also come into place. Thus far, we have not seen any ASEAN state leaders who actually come up with the comments, of course, and I don't think there will be any. But I think the pressure is certainly there, meaning it is a good opportunity for the human rights groups to use that to continue to pressure the ASEAN state leaders. And more so, of course, coming from Malaysia, the heat certainly put on our own government as the ASEAN chair. But the casting that abroad also, it says a lot of things about the ASEAN's conventional way of dealing with the human rights violations, because the next year, Philippines is the ASEAN chair. But we see what's happening today. While, yes, global attention is all on Duterte, but within Philippines itself, there is a strong political dynamics and also the contestations between the two political clans. So this can also tell us that what domestically happens in the politically in domestic level is sometimes also and very often actually impact on the regional level as well.
You were recently in the Philippines. What were your observations? What were people saying? People that you were speaking to, what were they saying about how this is developing?
Yeah, I was in Philippines for several times, and of course working with the human rights groups and the human rights scholars as well. Duterte is always being described as the little Trump in Asia because of his very unconventional foreign policies approach, especially when it comes to human rights violation in terms of the extrajudicial killing. But if you look at it on the ground, there is still a very strong support for Duterte. But I think what's also very important to see is that we will foresee the political crisis in a way inside the Philippines because of the Duterte's case in the ICC. And I think the both side, one from the Duterte's and one from the Philippines government sides, have come up with their competing narratives in terms of dealing with the Philippines case in the ICC itself.
Right. Ying Hooi, you mentioned a couple of times the role of human rights organizations. Can you explain or share more about the role that these organizations played in leading to this point, in documenting the abuses and advocating for accountability?
Well, we all know the resilience of the Philippines human rights groups in very well documented of what happens during Duterte's not only presidency, but including during the time that he was a mayor in the Davao city as well. So all these are being documented well together with the survivors. And I think over the years, this is where the ICC has accumulated the evidence. Although, of course, we cannot ignore that the narratives whereby how can Duterte's case being so swiftly being shifted to ICC has a strong political dynamics within it. And there comes the criticisms on the ICC as well later on. But I think casting that broader, it is still a very historical moment when it comes to bringing human rights violators into the justice.
I wanted to ask you about the ICC's credibility because this is such a high-profile case, particularly in this region. How does it affect the credibility and the perceived effectiveness of the ICC in prosecuting crimes against humanity? There are so many cases still, Gaza and Myanmar and Sudan and the Ukraine. Do you think this is going to be a litmus test for the ICC's ability to function effectively?
Yeah, well, we certainly cannot dismiss the influence of geopolitics when it comes to the credibility of the ICC, because earlier on you mentioned the case of, you look at the Netanyahu and also Putin, they're also under the arrest warrants. But I think geopolitical influence is very strong in actually stopping this from happening. By having said that, is to bring them into justice in the ICC. And what happens in the Philippines is also, you will see that the ICC needs the state cooperation as well in order to make it work. So I think that is one of the factors how this becomes so swiftly being put forward into the ICC for the case of Duterte as well. So there's also criticisms about ICC being focused too much on a certain region, such as African leaders. So yes, I think international human rights mechanisms, regional human rights mechanisms always has its flaw. And because the state actors are playing the dominating role here. But I think apart from that, the Philippines case also should not ignore the resilience of the survivors, as well as the human rights groups in also making this to happen.
Right. So we know that the next, I think, the next proceeding will be in September. But what will you be watching out for in terms of how this plays out?
Well, yeah, the trial will be in September 23rd this year. So I think right now in the Philippines, there's a lot of protests being going on, and I think what will be very exciting to be watched and to determine what how this is going to be turned out is the midterm elections that are going to happen in May. So when I was in Manila, there was a lot of campaign posters already around Manila, because the elections is coming. So hence, I must say that there will be uncertainties certainly inside the Philippines, and there could possibly be political change or something like that as well, because we also have to see that there's also impeachment case of Sara Duterte, the daughter of the Rodrigo Duterte as well. So all this being put into place, of course, is a very complex situations, but still, I think the case being put into the ICC will be at another level. But we will see whether the domestic politics going to make any influence or impact on that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show with me and sharing some of your insights. Dr. Khoo Ying Hooi there from UM's Department of International and Strategic Studies. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned. Hi, welcome back to Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. Let's continue our discussion about the arrest and transfer of Rodrigo Duterte, the former president of the Philippines, to the International Criminal Court at The Hague. Does Duterte's arrest signal a new era of accountability for powerful leaders in the region, or will it deepen political divisions in the Philippines? Well, joining me now from Manila is Dr. Aries Arugay, who is a visiting senior fellow and coordinator of the Philippine Studies Programme at ASEAS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. Aries, thank you so much for being on the show with me. It's good to have you back. I'm curious to know what the reactions of the general populace have been to Duterte's arrest. What have you been observing the past few days?
Thank you for having me. In terms of the domestic reactions, at the moment we could have two indicators, what is happening on social media, but also there's been some movement, there's some public display of either support or disagreement with the arrest. So for example, yesterday, an estimated around 10,000 people mobilized in Davao City, which is considered to be the stronghold of the Dutertes. This is not surprising. I would be surprised if there were no pro-Duterte rally in the bailiwick of the Duterte dynasty. But we don't see similar rallies or similar demonstrations of that volume yet, that magnitude in Manila and in other urban places. On the other hand, in social media, it's also a polarizing issue. We tend to notice that there's a lot of fake news going around about the arrest. There's a lot of misinformation about narratives that tend to mostly favor Rodrigo Duterte and the Duterte dynasty. But this is not surprising because the infrastructure of misinformation that tends to benefit the Dutertes have been robust throughout the years. And in fact, some of the misinformation have been downright absurd. Like you would have memes or quote cards quoting Donald Trump, quoting all kinds of world leaders, saying that Duterte's arrest was illegal, etc. And the sad fact is that these are believed by some Filipinos, even though it's quite obvious that these are outright falsehoods.
So let's talk about the support that Duterte still enjoys and the narratives around that. There's been a lot of conversation around foreign interference and contravening national sovereignty. Does this narrative risk radicalizing certain segments of the population?
Right, and this is a narrative amplified in social media, but this has already been refuted and repudiated because the arrest is actually grounded in national law. There's RA 9815 that strengthens, in fact, and indicates that the Philippine government could cooperate with the ICC on matters related to crimes under the jurisdiction of the ICC under the Rome Statute. So in terms of whether the arrest is within the laws of the country, the answer is the affirmative. The term is may cooperate. So at the end, it was a political choice by the Marcos Jr. administration. And of course, while the government may formally deny it, the biggest contributing factor to the arrest and the handing to ICC, to Interpol, was the breakup of the Marcos Duterte alliance. But I was looking at public opinion polling about the ICC's case against Duterte and the drug war. And as you may notice, the drug war was quite popular. A lot of Filipinos thought, and this has been the crowning achievement, crowning legacy of the Duterte administration. But some polling as early as the 2023 until last year indicates that there's a large, almost a majority, 49%, up to 59% of Filipinos believe that the ICC could and has jurisdiction over the extrajudicial killing. So in terms of supporting the drug war, a lot of Filipinos may support it, but they also believe that if there will be an ICC case, that they don't disagree that the ICC should get involved in the case and in making accountable those that have perpetrated the killings. Mm-hmm. So in a way that you have this tension within the Filipino psyche. On the other hand, they laud the drug war. They see that this is something that is not only concrete, something that they could immediately felt the after effects, because it's the fear factor. If you have all these extrajudicial killings, instantly things could become secure in the short term. But deep within the Filipino psyche is also this idea that human rights need to be protected. Mm. So therefore, it's such a contradiction. A lot of Filipinos want security, but they don't want to be victims of human rights violations as well. Right. So therefore, this is something that still, I think, is a dilemma that is ongoing. And this is why you really have a Filipino society that's trying to reconcile both. And it's obvious that we're still trying to figure out the right combination of ensuring security and not trampling down on human rights.
Okay. How does the local political dynamics shape that? Because we have the midterm elections coming up in May, and you talked about the falling out or the significant divisions of the ruling coalition, the Duterte Marcos coalition. How do we make sense of what's happening politically? Is the Philippines are you concerned that the Philippines might be on the verge of more of political unrest?
Right. Well, what's good is that we have an upcoming election. So in a way, some of the energies that have been generated by the ICC arrest could be channeled institutionally through elections, right? So the Duterte supporters have been invoking people power, which is quite ironic because when they were the government of the day, they have maligned the idea of people power, right? They said that this has no use. This is only going to destabilize the country. But when the shoe is on the other foot, they wanted to use it, right? So I'm going to call it outright. The hypocrisy is baffling. They invoked due process and human rights for Duterte, but where were those for the thousands, tens of thousands who were killed, allegedly, right? So that's the irony, if I may say. Irony would be a more diplomatic way of saying it, but some view it as outright hypocrisy. The midterm elections now, I think, particularly the 12 slots for the Senate, which is a nationally elected body, I think the ICC arrest has become the defining issue of the campaigns of senators. It used to be the looming impeachment trial of Vice President Sara Duterte, but I think the ICC arrest has superseded that because there's already consensus that the trial will likely start, the impeachment trial will likely start after the elections.
What lessons do you think we should take from this? I mean, in this moment, what does it tell you about power, about accountability, about the limits of political influence?
I think before the arrest, there's been already an emerging backlash, if not negative reaction, criticism. In fact, we're hearing it from Trump right now about the ICC, about the notion of individual criminal accountability. When that norm was already, emerging since the 1990s, right after the Cold War. I think this arrest, the first former Asian head of state, and in fact, Asia has been underrepresented in a lot of the ICC cases. I think this is a monumental watershed for the region because this means that the norm of global individual criminal accountability has reached the world's largest continent. And that sends us to somehow the idea that state sovereignty, and particularly in our part of the world, in Southeast Asia, we take pride, not pride, but we take a lot of emphasis on non-intervention, on the idea of non-interference in domestic affairs. And many analysts have said that this has been an obstruction to the pursuit of democracy, rule of law, and human rights. I think this arrest, if I'm a former leader or a politician who might have perpetuated some of these crimes, I would think and say that, oh, this happened to the Philippines. This happened to a firebrand populist leader, very popular, cursed at the US, hobnobs with China and Russia, but is now facing a trial for alleged crimes against humanity by an international institution that has hundreds of signatories. So I think that this has regional implications. Right. This might inspire similar campaigns for human rights and accountability in other countries, that there's hope that the powerful could be held into account. But this is just a start. The trial will take years, and therefore it requires vigilance on the part of human rights defenders, civil society, media, academia, and the rest, to ensure that while the trial has started, that the outcome will be something that will further the cause of human rights and criminal accountability, not only in Asia, but in the world, perhaps.
Aries, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing some of those insights with us. I appreciate your time. That was Dr. Aries Arugay, visiting senior fellow at ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore. And that wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.